My name is Anna, and for my entire life I felt like a stranger in my own home. I used to think the worst day of my life was when my adoptive parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, stood on a brightly lit stage at their foundation's gala and made a cruel joke about me. It was a joke that made 200 of the city's most powerful people laugh, and then fall into a deep, uncomfortable silence as my soul just broke. In that single searing moment of public humiliation, surrounded by glittering chandeliers and the smell of money, I thought my world had ended. But I was wrong. The worst day of my life was actually the beginning of the worst days of theirs. It happened 1 week later, in a sterile, imposing courtroom. It was the day the secret I'd uncovered made the judge himself, a man famous for his iron will and unshakable composure, tremble with a fury so profound, so personal, that I will never ever forget it. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below and leave your like. Helps a lot. Section 1. The Gilded Cage. To the outside world, Richard and Eleanor Vance were practically saints. Their names were etched onto the marble facades of libraries and the gleaming walls of hospital wings, a constant public testament to the so-called generosity of the Vance Foundation. They were pillars of our society, masters of philanthropy and quiet, old-money elegance. And I was their crowning achievement. Anna Vance, the silent, watchful black girl they had so benevolently plucked from the foster care system, a living testament to their progressive ideals. In their meticulously crafted version of the story, my life was a fairy tale. They had rescued me, a lost and lonely orphan, and bestowed upon me a life of unimaginable privilege. Our home was a sprawling, art-filled mansion that felt more like a modern art museum than a place for a child to grow up. Every surface had a mirror shine, meticulously wiped clean of any fingerprints or signs of life. Every room was curated to perfection, filled with stark white furniture, abstract sculptures, and paintings so valuable they were practically inmates under house arrest. It was a beautiful gilded cage, and I was the exotic bird they kept inside, a living, breathing symbol of their virtue signaling. They claimed to love me, or at least they passionately loved the idea of me. They loved telling the dramatic, heart-wrenching story of my adoption and watching their friends' eyes soften with manufactured admiration. They relished playing the role of saviors, of noble crusaders who had reached down and saved one fortunate soul from the darkness. But they never actually saw me. My silence, which was really just a defense mechanism learned over years of uncertainty in the foster system, they misinterpreted as simplicity. They saw a blank canvas, not a person with a history and a hidden inner world. They dressed me in expensive, uncomfortable clothes, sent me to the best, most isolating private schools, and paraded me around at their endless charity events. I wasn't a daughter. I was a walking, talking accessory to their perfect, philanthropic life. I learned my place very quickly. I was supposed to be eternally grateful, perpetually quiet, and keenly watchful. I became an expert at reading the silent, frigid currents in our home. I understood that their affection was entirely conditional, tethered to the flawless image I helped them project to the world. I would sit at their long mahogany dining table, a ghost at the feast, listening to them discuss fundraising strategies, tax loopholes, and gala guest lists. I felt this profound, unshakable sense of dislocation, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life, a life I was in but never truly a part of. They'd speak with performative passion about charity and compassion, but their eyes would just glide right past me, seeing only the reflection of their own perceived goodness. This feeling of being an invisible ghost in my own life became a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my existence. I had a beautiful room with a view of manicured gardens, the best education money could buy, and anything a girl could supposedly want, except a real human connection. I was an asset, symbol, a story they had written and a story they brutally controlled. For years I told myself that this was enough, that the physical safety and financial security they provided was a fair trade for the piece of my soul that felt completely and utterly invisible. I reasoned that their cold, performative version of love was the only one I was ever going to get, so I should just be thankful and play my part. But a quiet, stubborn truth always lingered in the deepest corner of my heart. Their love was a performance, and I was just the star prop section 2, the joke. The moment the first deep crack appeared in their flawless marble facade was at the Vance Foundation's 10th anniversary gala. This was the social event of the year, held in the city's most opulent ballroom, a cavernous space dripping with crystal and gold. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, fine leather, and the clinking of champagne glasses, a symphony of self-congratulation. My parents were in their element, gliding through the crowd like royalty, accepting fawning compliments with their signature practiced humility. I stood near the edge of the room in a stiff emerald green silk dress they'd picked out for me, feeling, as I always did, like an anthropologist studying a strange and alien tribe. I was 16, and my job for the night was simple. Smile demurely, be polite when spoken to, and serve as the living, breathing proof of their good work. I was a prop, and tonight I was on full display. The main event of the evening was my parents' speech. They took the stage to a thunderous round of applause, a single brilliant spotlight casting them in a heavenly, almost holy glow. Eleanor went first, her voice full of perfectly modulated sincerity as she recounted the foundation's achievements, the libraries built, the scholarships funded. Then it was Richard's turn. He was a master showman, effortlessly charming and devastatingly witty, and he had the audience of millionaires and billionaires hanging on his every word. Eleanor and I are often asked what our greatest investment has been over the past decade, he began. His voice as smooth as velvet, wrapping the room in its confident embrace. Was it the new pediatric wing at St. Jude's? The university scholarship fund for underprivileged youth? He paused, a playful, knowing smile spreading across his lips. And I always say those are wonderful, of course. But our most unique acquisition has to be our daughter, Anna. A wave of warm, appreciative laughter rippled through the crowd. My insides twisted into a familiar, painful knot. I felt my smile tighten, the muscles in my cheeks aching from the effort. But he wasn't done. He then motioned to me, a grand, sweeping gesture, and the spotlight operator swung the harsh white beam over, pinning me in its unforgiving glare. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, a physical weight of scrutiny. I forced my small, tight smile to hold, a silent prayer screaming in my head. Please stop. We saw her potential from the start, Richard continued, his smile widening into a triumphant grin. A real diamond in the rough. We were on the verge of funding a new primate sanctuary that year, but we crunched the numbers, and it turned out that adopting Anna was, well, it was significantly more cost-effective. Better PR, too. The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't polite chuckles. It was loud, unrestrained, braying laughter. And in that moment, under the heat of the spotlight, something inside me didn't just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The joke landed, and with it, the raw, ugly, unvarnished truth of what I was in their lives. I wasn't a daughter. I was a line item on a budget. A cost-effective acquisition. Better public relations than a monkey sanctuary. As the laughter swelled, a tidal wave of sound washing over me, I watched their faces. They were beaming, glowing with pride at their shared punchline. They were looking at each other, a private, congratulatory moment, not at me. And in that instant, I saw it all with horrifying, soul-crushing clarity. The years of feeling like an outsider weren't just in my head. I was a transaction. A strategic move in their game of social chess. A trophy to be polished, displayed, and now joked about. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the laughter died. A strange, uncomfortable silence rippled outward from the stage, extinguishing the mirth. People began to shift in their seats, their smiles faltering and melting away. A few guests, their faces painted with a sudden, fleeting pity, glanced at me before quickly looking away, as if they'd seen something indecent, something they weren't supposed to. The joke had been a little too sharp, a little too close to a truth nobody in that room wanted to acknowledge. I stood frozen in the spotlight, the silence now more deafening and more humiliating than the laughter had been. The warmth drained from my face, and the glittering ballroom started to blur at the edges. They hadn't just told a bad joke. They had ripped back the curtain and shown everyone the cold, transactional machine that powered their perfect family. And they had done it for a laugh. That night I didn't cry. The humiliation was too deep, too cold for tears. Instead, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the wreckage of my 16-year-old heart. They had written my story for my entire life. Now, it was my turn to find the truth. Section 3. The first thread. The week following the gala was suffocating, heavy with unspoken tension. My parents moved through the house with a forced, brittle cheerfulness, acting as if nothing had happened. Their politeness was a thin, fragile mask over the gaping chasm that had opened between us. They tried to talk to me about summer plans, about a new dress they wanted to buy me, but my answers were clipped, one-word responses. My silence, once a sign of my meek compliance, had transformed into a weapon. It unnerved them. They had no idea what to do with a prop that had suddenly, inexplicably, developed a mind of its own. My mission began in my father's office, the one room in the entire mansion that was strictly, unequivocally off-limits. It was his sanctuary of power, a fortress of leather-bound books, dark, imposing wood, and meticulously guarded secrets. Richard Vance was a man of obsessive, meticulous records, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that if they had any skeletons, they would be alphabetized, filed, and locked away in that room. I waited until they were out for the evening at another one of their charity dinners. The sprawling house was eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors. His office door was locked, of course. But years of being an invisible observer in my own home had taught me things. The spare key, I knew, was hidden in a hollowed-out copy of The Great Gatsby on the library shelf, a detail I had silently clocked years ago when my father, thinking he was alone, had retrieved it. His favorite book, about a man who built a beautiful, false world for a love he could never truly have. The irony was not lost on me. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird as I turned the key. The lock clicked open, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. The office smelled of old paper, leather, and my father's cologne, the scent of his power and control. It was an intimidating space, designed to make people feel small. For a moment, I felt a wave of fear, a voice telling me to turn back, to lock the door and return to my cage. But the memory of their smiling faces, bathed in laughter at my expense, pushed me forward. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Adoption papers. Letters from the agency. Anything that could explain the cruelty of the joke that had just obliterated my identity. I started with his massive mahogany desk. It was covered in foundation business, investment portfolios, and letters from important people. Nothing. I moved to the tall, ornate filing cabinets that lined one wall, a library of secrets. They were organized by year. With trembling hands, I pulled out the drawer for the year I was adopted. Inside, I found a thick folder with my name neatly typed on the tab. Anna. My hands shook so badly I could barely lift it out. It contained the official adoption decree, my new birth certificate, and glowing reports from the social worker who had handled my case. Everything looked perfect, pristine, and official. There were pages of laudatory reviews of Richard and Eleanor, calling them a godsend, an ideal placement, and a blessing to the community. A wave of bitter disappointment washed over me. It was all exactly as they'd always said. A legal, benevolent rescue. Was I wrong? Was I going crazy? Was the joke just a horrible, thoughtless mistake, not a sign of something darker? I was about to slide the file back into its place when my fingers brushed against it. Tucked at the very back, hidden behind all the official documents, was a separate, thinner envelope. It was plain, brown, and sealed. And on the front, in my father's sharp, decisive handwriting, was one cryptic word. Nightingale. My breath caught in my throat. It was such a strange, poetic word to find in a stack of sterile legal papers. My heart hammering, I carefully broke the seal. Inside wasn't a document, but a single sheet of ledger paper. It was a list of what looked like code names, followed by dollar amounts and dates. Sparrow, $15,000. Robin, $20,000. Finch, $12,000. What was this? It looked like some kind of secret accounting sheet, a black book. And then I saw it. The very first entry on the page, dated almost 17 years ago. Nightingale number 1, $10,000. Beside it, in parentheses, were 2 sets of initials. The first was Sis. The second, so chilling it stole the air from my lungs, was my own. Evie. Anna Vance. My adoption file. My new name. I was Nightingale number 1. I wasn't just a cost-effective acquisition they joked about. I was a purchase. They had paid $10,000 for me. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. The pristine, powerful office suddenly felt like a crime scene, the walls closing in on me. Codenames. Sparrow, Robin, Finch. Were they other children? Was the Vance Foundation, the galas, their perfect philanthropic image? Was it all built on a foundation of human trafficking? The initials CSS were a mystery, but AV was undeniable. I was Nightingale number 1. The first bird they bought for their gilded cage. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. Section 4. Project Nightingale. Finding the Nightingale ledger was like finding a key to a secret, horrifying world that had been running parallel to mine the whole time, right under my feet. I spent the next few days in a disoriented fog of fear and adrenaline, my mind racing to piece together the monstrous implications. My quiet, observant nature, the very trait my parents had dismissed as simplicity, now became my greatest weapon. I had spent my life as a ghost in their house, learning their rhythms, their secrets, their vanities. Now I was going to be a detective. I knew the single ledger page wasn't enough. It was damning, but it was cryptic. I needed to understand what Project Nightingale really was and who the mysterious CSS was. I went back to my father's office every chance I got, my searches growing bolder and more desperate with each passing day. A man as obsessively careful and arrogant as my father would have more detailed records somewhere. He wouldn't be able to resist chronicling his secret success. My breakthrough came during a frantic search late one night. I was checking the back of his enormous office bookshelf, a wall of imposing legal texts. I ran my fingers along the spines, a desperate tactile search, and felt a slight give on a thick, leather-bound volume of international tax law. My heart leaped. I pressed it, heard a faint mechanical click, and a section of the bookshelf swung inward with a soft whoosh, revealing a small, hidden safe embedded in the wall. A wave of panic and triumph hit me at the same time. I couldn't crack a safe. It was over. But then I thought about my father. Richard Vance was a man of habit and monumental ego. His passwords were always tied to his achievements, dates that fed his narcissism. I tried the date the Vance Foundation was established. The light flashed red. The date he made his first million. Red again. Then, with a knot of dread and disgust tightening in my stomach, I punched in my own birthday, the day his most unique acquisition had arrived. The safe clicked open. Inside, there were no jewels or stacks of cash. It was something far more valuable and far more vile. Just a series of thick, neatly bound files. The cover of the first one, in stark black letters, read, Project Nightingale, Acquisitions and Placements. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break. This was it. The whole dark truth. With shaking hands, I pulled out the first file and opened it on the floor. The contents were sickeningly corporate, written with the detached, amoral language of a business report. Project Nightingale, the introductory documents explained, wasn't a charity initiative. It was a black market adoption ring, run with the chilling efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. It was operated by my parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, under the pristine, unimpeachable cover of the Vance Foundation. They specialized in acquiring minority children for their wealthy, powerful friends who wanted to skip the lengthy, uncertain legal process of adoption. The children were sourced in different ways, sometimes bought directly from desperate, vulnerable birth mothers, other times procured through corrupt officials within the state child services system. Each child was given a bird code name: Nightingale, Sparrow, Robin, Finch. Each file contained a photograph of an infant, a list of physical traits, and a procurement fee. My own file was right at the front. Nightingale number 1. It had a picture of me as a baby, my eyes wide and unblinking. It included a detailed summary of my marketability, and it had the full name for CSS. Carol Sterling, a senior administrator at the State Division of Child Services. The $10,000 payment had been a bribe to her, to falsify my records, bury my past, and push my adoption through their private channels as a legitimate state-sanctioned placement. My birth mother, the file noted with chilling detachment, had been told I was going to a loving middle-class family and was given a relocation grant of $500 before she conveniently disappeared from all records. They hadn't just bought me. They had built an entire criminal enterprise around stealing and selling children like me. They were child traffickers hiding in the most brilliant plain sight, using their philanthropy as the perfect, dazzling cover. Their friends, the ones who had laughed so heartily at the gala, were likely their clients. They weren't just laughing at a cruel joke. They were laughing as members of a secret, depraved club, celebrating their shared corruption. I felt so sick I had to sit on the floor, my head between my knees to keep from passing out. My entire life, every memory, every gift, every hollow "I love you" was a fraud. I wasn't rescued, I was trafficked. I wasn't a daughter. I was merchandise. The cold resolve I'd felt after the gala hardened into unbreakable steel. This was so much bigger than my humiliation. This was about every name, every code name in that safe. Sparrow, Robin, Finch, and dozens of others. My parents hadn't just wronged me. They had built an empire on stolen children. I knew I couldn't confront them. They would destroy the evidence and me with it, painting me as a delusional, hysterical girl. I took out my phone and, with hands that shook uncontrollably, started photographing every single page of every file in that safe. The ledgers, the client lists, the records of payments to Carol Sterling, my own receipt. Each flash of the camera felt like a small act of rebellion, a reclamation of the truth. With a digital copy of their entire criminal operation secured on my phone, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I found a small, gritty pro bono law firm online and made an appointment under a false name. My mind was set on one singular, terrifying goal. My parents wanted a public spectacle to put their ungrateful charity case back in her place. I was going to give them one, but it wasn't going to be the one they expected. I would use the very courtroom they respected so much, the pillar of the system they had so expertly corrupted, as the stage for their final spectacular downfall. Section 5. The Tremor of Justice. The day of the hearing was cold and overcast, the sky the color of slate. My parents had filed a petition to have me legally emancipated, framing it as a tragic but necessary step due to my increasingly erratic and hostile behavior. For them, this was the final act of control, a calculated performance to publicly discard the possession that was no longer serving its purpose. They walked into the courthouse flanked by their smug, high-priced lawyer, believing it was a simple family court matter, one more stage for them to play the part of wounded, benevolent parents, tragically let down by the very child they had saved. The courtroom was small and paneled in dark, intimidating wood that seemed to absorb all the light. Richard and Eleanor sat at their table, looking poised and confident. They'd whisper to each other, occasionally glancing over at me with carefully rehearsed looks of pity and sorrow. I sat alone at my table, a single folder in front of me. When the judge asked if I had legal counsel, I stood on shaking legs and heard my own voice, surprisingly steady, say, "I will be representing myself, Your Honor." I saw the corner of my father's mouth twitch into a smirk. He thought this was the final, pathetic act of a rebellious child. The judge was a man named Arthur Miller, a legend in the city, in his late 60s with a stern, weary face and a reputation for being absolutely unshakable. He looked down at the paperwork before him with an air of tired duty. On the surface, it seemed straightforward. Wealthy, concerned parents and a troubled, ungrateful teenager. My parents' lawyer went first, painting a masterful, heartbreaking picture of two loving parents pushed to their absolute limits. Richard and Eleanor both gave tearful, compelling performances about how they had given me everything: a home, an education, a world of opportunity, only to be met with inexplicable coldness and hostility. The narrative was perfect, polished, and utterly believable. Then it was my turn. Judge Miller looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice neutral and devoid of emotion, "you may present your case." I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady, and walked to the podium. I carried a single, sealed manila envelope. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and even, echoing slightly in the silent room, "I do not contest my parents' petition for my emancipation. In fact, I welcome it. I cannot, in good conscience, remain legally bound to Richard and Eleanor Vance." Richard and Eleanor exchanged a brief, triumphant look. They thought they'd won. The ungrateful prop was agreeing to be thrown away. "However," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "the reasons for my emancipation are not what they have presented to this court. They have painted me as an ungrateful child. But the truth is, I am not their child. I am their victim. And this is not a family matter. It is a criminal one." A murmur went through the small gallery. My parents' smiles froze on their faces. Their lawyer started to stand up to object, but Judge Miller silently waved him down. His eyes, for the first time, fixed on me with a flicker of sudden, sharp curiosity. "For 16 years, I said, my voice getting stronger with every word, "I was told I was rescued, that I was chosen. It was a lie." I opened the envelope and placed the first document on the overhead projector, its image appearing on the screen for the whole court to see. The Nightingale ledger. "This is an accounting sheet from my father's private, hidden safe," I explained, my finger pointing to the first line on the screen. "Nightingale number 1, $10,000. Nightingale is the code name they gave me when I was a baby. This is the price they paid for me." A collective gasp went through the room. Richard went bone white. Eleanor looked as if she'd been physically slapped. "My adoptive parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, are not philanthropists," I declared, my voice now ringing with absolute conviction. "They are human traffickers. For almost 2 decades, they have run a criminal enterprise they call Project Nightingale, buying and selling minority children to their wealthy friends, all under the pristine cover of the Vance Foundation." I put the next document on the projector, the file detailing the bribe to Carol Sterling at the State Division of Child Services. Then the next, a client list filled with the names of some of the most powerful people in the city, people who had laughed at the gala. Page after page, I presented the evidence from the safe, a cold, systematic demolition of their entire world. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the quiet click of the projector as I revealed the full, monstrous scope of their crimes. My parents sat frozen in their chairs, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated horror. Their perfect world was being systematically torched before their very eyes, by the very trophy they had so proudly displayed and so cruelly mocked. I saved my own file for last. I projected the page detailing my acquisition, the insultingly tiny relocation grant paid to my birth mother, and the clinical notes about my suitability as a long-term, high-visibility asset. When I finished, I turned to face the judge. And that's when I saw it. Judge Arthur Miller, the man of iron, was visibly trembling. His hands, resting on the dais, were shaking. His face was ashen, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his bench. But as I looked closer, I saw that it wasn't a tremor of shock or fear. It was pure, unfiltered rage. His eyes, when they met mine, were blazing with a fury so intense, so deeply personal, it felt like it was sucking the very air out of the room. He stared at Richard and Eleanor, who now looked so small and pathetic in their expensive clothes. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, shaking whisper that carried more weight and menace than any shout ever could. "In 25 years on this bench," he began, his voice cracking with a rage that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul, "I have seen greed. I have seen cruelty. I have seen the worst of humanity. But I have never," he repeated, his voice rising, "seen predators disguise themselves so completely as saviors. You did not adopt this child." He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You trafficked her. You bought and sold her, and dozens of others, as if they were property. You built your kingdom of lies on the backs of stolen children and used your charity to wash the blood from your hands. It was then that I saw it, on the edge of his desk, a framed picture of a young girl with laughing eyes, a picture he'd half covered with a file, as if he couldn't bear to look at it. He picked up his gavel, his hand shaking so hard the wooden mallet rattled against his palm. "This hearing is over," he roared, slamming the gavel down with a deafening crack that echoed like a gunshot. "Bailiff, take Mr. and Mrs. Vance into custody. Seal this courtroom. All records pertaining to Project Nightingale are to be turned over to the District Attorney's Office and the FBI immediately. This court hereby nullifies the adoption of Anna Vance, effective immediately. And as of this moment," he said, his furious eyes finding mine again, now softened with a profound, aching sadness, "Anna is a ward of this court under my personal protection." As the bailiffs came forward and put my former parents in handcuffs, their beautiful faces finally crumbling into the ruin they deserved, I didn't feel triumph or revenge. I felt a quiet, profound sense of justice. The trembling judge hadn't just given me my freedom. He had validated my truth with a fire born of his own hidden tragedy. The gilded cage was finally, irrevocably broken. The fall of the House of Vance was swift, brutal, and total. The investigation into Project Nightingale blew open a scandal that rocked the city to its foundations, implicating dozens of its most prominent and powerful citizens. The Vance Foundation was exposed for what it was: a sophisticated, monstrous front for a human trafficking ring. My case was the first domino, leading to the rescue and identification of 37 other children who had been bought and sold like commodities. The judge's personal connection became a quiet, heartbreaking footnote to the larger story. Years earlier, his own 7-year-old daughter had vanished. The case went cold, ruled a likely runaway. Now, armed with the Vance records, investigators found an old, unsolved case that matched: an early, undocumented acquisition. The judge, in fighting for me, had found the horrific truth behind his own life's greatest sorrow. Under his personal guardianship, I began the slow, painful process of discovering who I really was without the shadow of the Vances looming over me. With the help of investigators, my birth mother was found living in a neighboring state. Our first meeting was in a small, quiet coffee shop. She told me the story of a desperate, scared 19-year-old woman who was manipulated by a corrupt social worker, Carol Sterling, and tricked into believing she was giving her child up for a closed adoption to a loving middle-class family. She had been searching for me for years. We cried, we talked, and we began the slow, tentative steps of building a relationship, not to erase the past, but to build a new future on a foundation of truth. I am no longer Anna Vance. I am Anna Jackson, a name that feels like my own skin, a name that connects me to a past I thought was lost forever. I learned that my true identity was never about a name or a family, but about the strength I found in myself to fight for the truth. Justice didn't just set me free from a life of lies. It allowed me and 37 other stolen children to finally find our way home. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.